Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 21 of Mass and Mimicry Tabletop Role-Playing Podcast, where I and Brand
Hello.
spend every other Wednesday night at 6 p.m. Pacific time talking about tabletop role-playing. We do talk a lot about Dungeons & Dragons, but other tabletop games in general, because our specific focus is generally role-play. And the experience, different aspects of it, features for it, all of that. So, today, what we're going to talk about, if I'll stop hitting my microphone and making loud sounds,
Is mimosas.
Sure. Well, screwdrivers, sure. Character customizations for roleplay. And this is something that really can fit in a lot of things. This factors into like descriptive writing, for like creative writing and stuff, as well as roleplay. Because what we're really talking about here is a combination, kind of a hodgepodge of different things. But generally, where you're either going out of your way to describe or provide some flair to your character through mannerisms or specific traits that kind of iconically represent them. But also, and in particular, where we're going to kind of start, when you sometimes can't do things with your character, or there's things you want to do that don't explicitly fit in the rules, and so you bend them, or you change up how something works or maybe looks in a game to fit your character. You might customize the appearance of a spell, create your own spell, change something about how some aspect works to fit your character's design. So today we're going to talk about how you can work with your storyteller to do that.
Yeah.
First off, for chat, and for Brand, of course, do you have any prominent examples in mind that stand out for how you have done that or how someone else has done that?
Yeah. I won't use me. Probably a little harder, actually, for me to come up with my own example. But you play a character in my campaign who has sought to fill in elements of your personality and fears and or things that you've decided your character just like doesn't like, and turn
fears.
them in. Fears in particular, and turn them into minor creative elements that mean nothing to the sake of the things you do from your day-to-day activity for the most part. In particular, you have a spell, a mote of light, of green energy.
You're stealing my example.
Good. But it's this thing that it's a cantrip level spell in D&D. It does nothing except provide light. You use it when you're in places where you need it, but for the most part, you designed it as a creative flair, as a nightlight for when you go to bed. And since you've done that, every time I describe any situation where you're asleep to anyone else in the party, I make a reference to it because it's a thing.
I spent one of my precious cantrip spell slots, which I constantly am just like, I want Firebolt so bad, but I don't have any spell slots for it. I can't get it, but I want another attack spell. But yeah, I spent one of my precious 4 cantrip slots to create a necrotic mote of fire that is, as you said, basically a nightlight. It burns in a very low radius. It's kind of good for sneaking. Like, I can have some light and a lantern and sneak around, but outside of that, the whole purpose of it is a very small light that lasts for like 8 hours, so that when he sleeps, he can have a nightlight, because he doesn't like to sleep in the dark. And and I didn't want to burn oil like 24/7, like everywhere. That's just gets obnoxious.
It lasts for 8 hours, basically, so it's just before bed and wake up and you're good to go.
Yeah, and it is very much something that like only he would waste time on. No one else would waste time creating this. They would just use a permanent light source of some sort. And he's like, no, I want my little fireball. Which I did use it as like a little bit like a stepping stone towards another higher level spell that I kind of customized. Because in this case, I found that, my character, who was a necromancer, there weren't a lot of necromancy damage spells early on that I wanted to fit his theme and everything. So I took a common just fire evocation spell and customized it to make it be necrotic damage and make it a necromancy spell. In a similar way, but without really changing functionality at all. Another example I would say is from the popular show Critical Role. Caleb Widowgast has a number of cat-based spells. Where he's taken many normal D&D spells and just customized them so that it looks like a cat's paw or, some other cat-themed type thing because his character loves cats. And that's, I think, a great example of something that accentuates something about your character. It really tells people that your character freaking loves cats. Or, if people read into it enough, maybe it hints for my character Rohan that he doesn't like being in the dark. He always has this light going. Most of the time.
I think I do have one for at least one of my characters. In your campaign, I play Paladin, who follows a number of deities, depending on mood. And every time we go somewhere new or somewhere where I'm thinking about it, I'll ask around a local shop, like, hey, do you have any things with divine flair to it, symbology? And because I'm slowly building up a collection of things relevant to my character's deities. And this last weekend, I specifically looked for the making of one, and I'm nothing important to it. It's just showing to the other players that I'm a collector of some sorts, or I'm specifically trying to have a thing of each of these individuals.
Yeah, and I think one of the... I think the thing to consider also is the many different reasons why you would want to do this. For the first part, it's just fun. I think it's fun to be kind of creative and work outside the box with some of these things in a way that, instead of just using them kind of pre-canned. But also, I think they can be useful. They don't always have to be, but they can be useful in conveying things about your character, like some of your character's moods or internal issues or qualities, like being kind of afraid of the dark, or having a mutability of faith.
Yeah.
And I think they can really make the characters and the atmosphere more interesting when you start to tweak some of these things and change how they work. Yeah, that brings a lot of personalization. I actually think in some ways some of these aspects can be even better and more important than some backstory aspects to your character, because they are kind of a representation of your living role play and acting out of the character as you're describing these things.
Yeah, and probably more so a constant reminder session to session that you are this character. Even though your backstory is there, it kind of comes and goes probably throughout the course of a campaign, but your personality never leaves, and the things you do as a ritual day to day are always there.
Yeah, it really helps to kind of reinforce to other people what's the word I want? To immerse them into the game, because you're not just, hey, I'm casting fireball. You're doing you're describing certain gestures or certain effects that happen when your character casts fireball. What does it look like? Is it a little spit that shoots off and then it erupts out, or is it like just you summon a huge ball and then you hurl it at somebody? You can do a lot of different things with it, and it doesn't have to be spells.
Yeah, you could be a vampire and have a creative flair. In Masks or the Masquerade and VTM have a creative flair on how you bite people, how you feed. That is slightly weird and awkward compared to everyone else. There's a ritual to the process of feeding or something.
Mm-hmm. You might have you might customize appearance or gear, weaponry balance, and aesthetic abilities.
I think a lot of people do that. When it comes to the things you wear, people look for resources online. You have a broad category, like I'm wearing leather armor, but then you look outside of the books that are provided to you for all the ranges of leather armors and say, I wear that.
Yeah, and I kind of want to get into each one of these specifically a little bit. I think for a list, we kind of have general appearance, gear, weaponry, abilities / spells. You know, for some games it might be spells. For some games like Vampire, it might be specific abilities that you have, disciplines that you can customize, how your character uses them or what it looks like, or in some cases, what does it feel like?
Yeah.
So, for some reason, my throat just feels kind of phlegmy. Sorry. One thing, I guess, where we can start is talking about appearance and gear to get off of spells for a minute, because I'm sure we're going to spend a minute there as well. But but appearance and gear for D&D, I think it's possible for your gear and stuff, your choices for clothing and or armor and such, they don't necessarily, they sometimes won't fit as easily into the game you want. Or maybe you want to customize something in a different way and it doesn't fit so well, whether you're doing it for a particular flair, like you've just decided, I want to have a scythe, which is not a weapon in D&D, for instance.
Right.
Or maybe you decide, you take influences from something that's not very Eurocentric, which D&D is very European-centric. There may be armors and stuff that aren't represented in there, and so then you have to work with your storyteller to go, okay, I want to wear this. What do we do? And then they can go, well, I think that's scale mail, or I think that's breastplate, and they kind of apply those rules over for something that it doesn't necessarily fit onto 100%.
Right. And you just have to template it, basically, find a close proximity and kind of just go with it, and you're good.
And I think for a lot of things, and this is something I've been working on for quite a while myself, is allowing the rule of cool to prevail, trying to say yes more often to things. And not everything necessarily needs to be perfectly balanced. And this, that varies in different games. Like D&D is a strategic game at the end of the day. There's a lot of strategic combat and stuff in it. So in a game like that, I'm a little bit more concerned as a DM whether something's overpowered or something. But something I try to struggle with is that, if somebody wants to do something, letting them do it unless I really have a reason not to. A reason that's not that the book says they can't, or that the book says it's supposed to be one way or something. Because, and even if it is maybe a little bit unbalanced, like as long as it's not glaringly broken, I don't think anyone's going to super care. And so if you have to fudge things a little bit, like, okay, this armor is maybe chainmail, but there's some reason I think I don't want to give them the disadvantage for stealth or something because of some reason. Maybe I'll count it as breastplate or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
Kind of fudge some of those things for just to make it fun. Or a perfectly good case is, what if someone just likes the look of scale mail, but they really want breastplate effects wise, but they really think scale mail looks cool. Like I personally just think scale mail looks awesome, but it's kind of sucks in D&D compared to breastplate. So what I would do as a DM is I would just let someone buy scale mail and pay the price for breastplate for it and just call it breastplate, but it looks like scale mail. Because why not?
Yeah. It's improved scales, linked
It's masterwork
together
scale mail.
Yeah, masterwork.
That's why not. It's been treated
heavy duty
to be stealthier. And I try to look at some of these things from a balance standpoint, but also from just an aesthetic standpoint sometimes. Like I have at times created different armor types for druids because they're not supposed to wear like metal and stuff. And I think there's a couple areas on here, and this is where I'm possibly going to tread some controversy. There's a couple areas where you may change some of these things for the sake of balance and aesthetic. And my biggest example is D&D. 5th edition and older editions, honestly. And I'm just going to go out here and say it. The D12 is stupid. There is no purpose for a D12 in most D20 games, especially D&D. It doesn't really serve a purpose. I know it's kind of satisfying to roll a D12, but I am convinced that the only reason a D12 exists in most D20 sets is because it was originally a thing in D&D, and they just kind of keep it around for tradition's sake. Because honestly, what is it used for? It's used for like one or two things, and the Great Axe. Which, there's a problem with that. Oh, the Barbarian hit die. Whoop-de-doo. Yeah. There's a problem with the Great Axe. I have, on several occasions, considered when DM... It's never come up because no one's ever asked to use a Great Axe. But I've, on several occasions, considered ruling when I was DMing a game that a Great Axe just does greatsword damage. 2d6 instead of a d12. Because it does actually matter. In 5th edition D&D.
That does matter, yeah.
I have felt compelled sometimes, even though I am not a min-maxer, I have sometimes felt compelled, like, I kind of want to use a Great Axe, but then felt compelled, like, but Great Axe is stupid. Like, the damage and everything on a Greatsword is so much better. And same thing with the Great Maul. It's just better than a Great Axe. Because, well, it's, one, the minimum damage is one higher than on a Great Axe, but also there's a number of feats and class abilities that will improve a 1 if you rolled it on a damage die. So you roll a 1, it bumps it, it lets you re-roll it and do more damage. So suddenly, if you have one of those abilities, rolling 2d6 versus 1d12 is a really big difference, and you can suddenly get much higher damage rolls on average with that 2d6. And so I've considered before, if somebody, like I've considered several times, if somebody were to be like, I kind of want to use a Great Axe, but it sucks, I'd be like, just roll 2d6 damage. Just make it 2d6. Same as a Great Sword, you can use it. Because the only reason they want the Great Axe is because aesthetically they like axes. Yeah. But for some reason, it's the only really big two-handed weapon that's different than the other two, which both do 2d6. Getting off my soapbox.
No, I agree with you on that. No, it seems fair that I don't understand, thinking about it at least right now in this few seconds I have to think about it, why that would be the case. But
why is it different damage than Greatsword or a Great Maul? One's even slashing. They're both really big weapons. They have the same benefits. Now, in older editions, there were sometimes differences between some of these weapons and differences in critical range and stuff. Some of them might crit on a 19 through 20 to help balance things out, stuff like that. But they took all that out with 5th edition. So now it's just straight damage, and now the Great Axe is just kind of dumb. So I could see aesthetic reasons that someone would want to use it, and I would just be like, nah, screw that. We're not doing 1d12. Unless you really want to do 1d12, then you can keep it. But let me buff that axe for you. But that's kind of my my soapbox rant about appearance, gear and stuff.
Gear-wise, yeah. There's so much you can just detail out flavorfully and describe it. It's your character. You wear what you wear. You call it scale mail or breastplate, but you get to decide how it looks at the end of the day. So
yeah, and I think this is another thing that I've actually been shifting on over the last year or so with describing NPCs and characters and stuff. Because I have a tendency historically to list off the description of my character or my NPC or whatever. Go in there and be like, they've got, they're 6 foot tall with blonde hair and gray eyes, kind of a lean musculature, and they have armor and and they have this, and you see a great sword and all this stuff. And I still do that sometimes more with NPCs to try and imbue an appropriate idea of their capabilities and stuff for the players, especially in a game like D&D. But one thing I've been kind of persuaded by a little bit more over time is that when you're describing your characters, instead of, especially for player characters, instead of describing like all the attributes of them, because people aren't going to remember it, you should focus on the just a couple of things that stand out. If your character is really tall, you don't even necessarily need to be like they're 6'5", but just be like they are tall and lumbering and kind of loom over most people.
Yeah.
And then that's something that they're going to be like, that's in their head every time they think of your character. Big, looming ogre or whatever. And for instance, with an NPC I introduced in my game recently, I kind of tried to focus more on describing that she wears this dark red cloak and her ornate arcane firearm, because it's an artificer, that she has, that has triple barrels and is steel and gold. And when she fires it, the barrels actually rotate, and then it like blasts out of like one of the barrels, which is totally not in the description of an arcane firearm is like what it does. It can just be a stick, like a literal staff. But
it sounds cool.
It sounds cool, and I wanted to emphasize that the things that she does as an artificer isn't necessarily like just magic. There is like mechanical aspects to it as well. There is engineering that goes into it.
I like it.
So I think you can, when thinking about some of that, you can, I guess my point is you can really think about what aspects of your character you want to emphasize, that you want people to remember, and then those are the ones you can call out and kind of be creative with and tweak and,
Yeah, especially
wear a big hat. I mean, who knows?
Yeah, and as a DM, you have hundreds upon hundreds of NPCs, in longer campaigns that you have to discuss and talk about. Some are more important than others. Some are more long-lasting than others and around more than others. And you have so much time or so little time to really get through your content, So maybe focus on some very specific details so that you can get it across, get a cool vibe, and then continue on.
Yeah, with NPCs, unless it's a complete throwaway, I usually try to like pick one appearance quirk to mention. Like, be like, yeah, they're kind of thin, dark hair. They have a stooped posture. All right, this one's kind of a tall guy with a pronounced Adam's apple. He's got a big nose. There's something out there just to be like, because then that's what they fixate on. And I'm like, there you go, you have a thing to think about.
Yeah, and just like all players who come up with their own unique elements for their characters, you can give every NPC a unique-ish thing to focus on too. And the more important the NPC, maybe throw one or two more unique-ish things in there.
And I think one of the things that's important to mention is you may not have to bend the rules, like changing the damage dice on a weapon or something. You may not have to bend those rules in some other systems. For instance, games like Vampire are intentionally built to be more narrative. They are built to allow you to describe your world and your characters and stuff. And so they kind of just work that way. They're more malleable. They're like, well, there's clothes, and then there's some light armor, which here's some examples, and then there's like moderately armored, which here's some examples. Figure it out.
Yeah. Go with the broad category. It opens up your thinking process a bit.
So, I'm going to circle us back around to abilities and spells.
Not appearance.
Oh, you got anything to say about appearance that we haven't already gone into?
That was largely gear and stuff.
Yeah.
Describing as NPCs or players, other appearances, more bodily appearances, skin tones, eye colors, hair uniqueness, things like that certainly go a long way, especially if they are things you keep kind of reinforcing, not every session, but throw in every few sessions as a reminder, like, hey, my hair's purple, or hey, I have a mohawk, just remember that.
It's helpful.
It's helpful. Yeah. And I have a changeling who has 4 different appearances, and sometimes I forget. And so that's like one of the things for me is like, I would go through a lot to just reinforce that, because I have to, in this case, that I look a different way. Because even then, like talking about it, I still get questions from our players like, so wait, what form are you in again? It's like, so you have to sometimes just describe it so they remember it.
It helps that you use a different voice for each one of the appearances. Helps kind of emphasize the shift a little bit, so it's easier to remember that something different or a different role. But even then, yeah, it's hard to remember. And it's easier to remember things about your own character than it is to remember things about other people's characters, and that works vice versa. They forget things about your character because they're focused on their own character. So you have to kind of remind occasionally. You don't want to throw it out constantly, but if you want people to know that your character has stunning blue eyes, then just periodically mention it. And it could be casual throwaway statements like they turn their blue eyes towards you.
Yeah.
Once you've described it, once you just throw something like that out every now and then, and people remember, oh, that character has blue eyes. We get it. Yeah. You do it too much, they're going to be like, we get it. You have blue eyes.
Yeah. So you cast a spell, the blue eyes sparkle.
Yeah. And that could be a flare of spells and abilities. It could be a thing like my character Rohan. I love describing spells, coming up with what different spells look like and stuff. And I decided early on, my wizard is like a Harry Potter wizard. Like he has a wand as his focus, and he does lots of swish and flick. That's what he would do. He currently is using a staff, but still, before that, he was like swish and flick. But I still describe different things he would do. Like for each spell would have a different wand gesture that I kind of created to do, and I just early on I described some of them just to kind of get across that idea that that's a thing he does. But then I described some of them, like False Life is a necromancy spell where you bolster your own health. And he would have this kind of 3-point gesture he would make with his wand, and then this kind of greenish energy would absorb into him, and his eyes would glow. And the whole time the spell was lasting, his eyes would have like this greenish tint to them as the representation of what that spell looks like.
Yeah, and we even talked about that behind the scenes recently about like the somatic elements of holding the wand and doing the swish and flick style, and thinking about it, like it doesn't follow the rules per se. Like technically, you have to have a free hand to use somatic stuff.
I gotta do a little finger wiggle.
Yeah, but it like totally makes sense. That's the Harry Potter verse of magic. That's how magic works in that universe, and the gestures of the wand movement are the somatic components. It's like, yeah, let's do it. There's no reason why that wouldn't make sense.
Well, and especially in that case, which is in part because I also DM, so I think about balance and stuff too. And I'm like, I don't want to do something. I'm not trying to do it because I want to make it broken. I'm doing it because I just want the flair of being able to like hold a shield and do my wand and be like, woo. So I was like, would it be okay if I do that as long as my wand does not give a bonus? Because I know some wands do. You can have a magic wand that gives you a bonus to attack and everything, and then that kind of does get in the area where I'm treading on stealing a bonus I'm not supposed to have, mechanically speaking. But I was like, my wand doesn't do that, though. It just keeps me from having to pull it out. I could have a free hand and just pull out the components, but I don't want to do that.
You
I
could have
wiggle the wand.
A finger that is your wand, and
yeah.
It counts. So, and I think it fits in thematically with wizards in general. If you have a character who is a wizard, they're described with their spell books as being very unique to the person, to the wizard in particular. And if you find another wizard spell book, you're not going to know, even if you know what those spells are and have them, you don't always immediately understand them because they're unique arcane flair or flavor to that particular wizard. So every wizard's different, and so having, a swish and flick wand style is like your arcane flair. And
kind of fitting with that, that's one of the ways that you can customize your ability use. Does your character use incantations? I actually originally used wand gestures and incantations, and I backed off the incantations because it started to feel like it was just absorbing time for me to recite something. Even if it was really short, I was like, this is obnoxious. I'll just occasionally describe the thing, and I don't even always describe the gesture either. Just sometimes I do. Or I describe, like he's using a staff right now, describe that the spell casts out of the eyes of the skull at the top of the staff.
Yeah.
Because you also don't want to eat up just too much time with your own personal description.
You can be light in description and throw in color, and especially if you're a divine caster, clerics and paladins, you've typically devoted yourself, maybe a little less so paladins, but clerics in particular have devoted yourself to a deity. Paladins can too. and maybe there are colors associated with your deity, and rather than spending 15 seconds on your turn before you even talk about what you're actually doing, reciting a ritual, you can just describe what you're doing with the color flare to it or something. It's like all my spells are always blue, always, because that's my deity.
All Rowan's necromancy spells are green because it just, I feel like they should be. That's the color I have chosen. Green and black.
But, it's simple. It doesn't go a long way. There's not a lot of mileage in it when you describe everything as blue, but it's something more than just fireball.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, some of these things, sometimes you want to do things to reveal things about your character, like having a magical nightlight. But sometimes it's an iconic thing. It's just about what represents your character. And then people come to associate blue magic with your character. They're the one with the blue magic. Gotcha.
We talked about Caleb's character from Critical Role Campaign 2. Very friendly towards cats, a huge cat fan. Also a huge fire buff. A lot of his spells are fire, and some of the first things he does are fire related in any combat situation. To the point where he's even customized his own fire spells, made new variants of Fireball, etc.
And that's definitely a thing you can do, is fitting spell selection to your character, choosing spells and or abilities that aren't just mechanically beneficial. And sometimes you need to do that too. Like, I really need a fireball, but choosing things that your character, would choose, that they would find interesting. Things that fit their interest and their personal flair, rather than just mechanical use.
Or reversely, specifically choose and come up with reasonings why you don't pick some things, why you leave certain spells off the table, especially if you're more of a veteran of D&D or other systems, and you're playing with other veterans of the systems. Everyone kind of knows what all the things do, or has a good idea what a lot of things do, and you get into that meta game situation where so-and-so's like, don't you have that one spell, blah, 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 and you could just completely hate a school of magic and refuse to take any spells from it. Just be like, no, like, I don't, that's not my thing, and I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole.
Charm magic is dirty. I'm not going to use that.
Yeah. Exactly. So you can have reasons and build in,
says the necromancer.
Yeah, says the necromancer. But you can have reasons why you specifically don't like to touch some schools of magic, and build that into your, not a big story thing, but just minor character elements.
Yeah.
Spark the question, why don't you like that, from one of the other players, and have a quick conversation about it.
Yeah, and I would say you could come up with a reason for any school of, like, D&D magic, for example. Divination, you have something against the idea of knowing the future or spying on people and knowing things that you shouldn't know. Charm magic, you have a problem with people being forced to do things against their will. I mean, that's real easy.
It's a little suspect.
Evocation, you feel like it unbalances nature and damages the natural world or something. I mean, you could have a whole host of reasons, whether they're factually accurate or not. I mean, that's a different matter. Yeah. This is about belief.
Character, creativeness, yeah.
Yeah. But I'd like to apply these to some other games and stuff besides spells.
Sure.
You've got, like, we've talked about Vampire a little bit. You've got games like that where you have disciplines. You have supernatural powers, but they're not normally at all like spells, unless you're getting into thaumaturgy.
Yeah.
But
which is very much like spells.
Yeah, but you can still have different things there. Like, when you use a vampire power, do you change your appearance? Do you look bestial? Do your eyes flash, or are you somehow, like, just charming and irresistible? Even take the same ability. Like, not aspects. Presence. That's the one I wanted. Presence, which is the supernatural kind of attractiveness. This doesn't necessarily have to be conveyed as, like, this sensual appeal. You could have someone who is just so confident looking that people want to follow them. They want to heed them. They look untouchable. Or you can have someone that just looks kind of snooty, and everyone's like, oh, no, they're gorgeous.
Even if they're not.
Yeah. different ways to do that.
Yeah.
Superhero RPG,
Aberrants.
superpowers.
You can pull a lot of creativity, flair, visual flair from Marvel, DC movies,
DBZ.
and DBZ. The uniqueness of how those things look is very flexible in something like a superhero or like Aberrant from White Wolf.
My beam's going to be triangular shaped.
Yeah.
Kiko ho!
Like they do a good job at, for the most part, describing the effect of the thing, and to some extent a visual element to it, but by no means do they tell you this is what it looks like, this is how it has to be.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, even if a game tells you that, like, this spell looks like this or does this, that you don't have to necessarily follow that. You can change it. And another thing you can do for spells that may not have like visual representations and such, you might be able to customize like how it feels. For instance, superhero games tend to have like mind control powers. How does it feel when you mind control someone? Does it feel exceedingly pleasant for them to obey? Like they just feel compelled to obey because it's enjoyable? Or is it punishing? Do they feel agony if they try to resist your control? Does it feel creepy? Like something's just slipping inside their mind? There's a lot of different ways you could describe something like that to give a feel for your character, most likely, and how they kind of are. Because that probably influences, how it works.
Yeah, for sure.
So the last thing I had that I really wanted to delve into here, which again for chat, y'all can throw out anything you want to if you have any examples here. Character mannerisms for RP. This is not really an area where you're breaking rules or anything to do something, but more just different quirks of behavior and what what is their purpose and what are they intended to convey, and what are some examples of things that you can do.
There are a lot of things you can do when it comes to mannerisms and quirks, and that
just
kind of
Google
includes really and mannerisms, not just physical mannerisms, verbal mannerisms, wordplay, and some of that can be dynamic with, as you're playing in a campaign, you enter into scenarios that maybe repeat themselves occasionally, and you start to grow very tired as a character, not a player, of those things happening. And you start verbally just be like, I'm done with this. I'm tired of being underground. I absolutely hate it. Never again. I'm done.
Until next week.
Until next week. And it just becomes a thing. You'll take a point, or in my case, I always take a point to remind the players at that point, I don't like being under here. Can we leave, please?
Every time we go underground, I almost die. Can we stop doing that?
Becomes a thing. Either going underground or creatures that come up from underground. It's one of those two things. So that becomes a thing, and you kind of play off of it, and you build something from a nothing, basically.
Yeah, and then people have fun with it. I personally like to use mannerisms to represent traits about my character that I want to emphasize or imply, but you don't have to. I mean, they could just be, what's the word I want? They can just be like things that represent your character, just things that make people think of your character when they see or hear them. They're iconic. That's the word I wanted.
Yeah.
But for me, I tend to like to often include habits and quirks and things that represent underlying aspects of the character that I want to hint at to people, or that don't need to be hinted at. For instance, my character Raven in the TT2KB channel's Zweihander campaign is a really fat dwarf. You roll characters randomly in this game, and I rolled that he was really fat. So that was a trait that I rolled. So he's very rotund. And so I decided that as a combination of one, he's got to be very rotund for a reason. He won't stop eating. And two, it's maybe a bit of a stress compulsion. He eats whenever food is available. If he sees food, and it's available for him to eat it, he's going to eat it. And so that is a quirk. And it actually came up in the very first game session because we snuck into a kitchen and people were like hiding to get away from stuff. And I was like, no, I'm going to hide behind the table with all the food and I'm going to steal food and eat it. And it turned into a funny moment where I'm like hiding and rolling under tables and eating a drumstick at the same time. But it came off this thing where I was just like, he eats food if it's available. That's the thing. My character Rohan is a little bit racked with self-doubt and is also very chaotic in nature. So I decided that if he's not really sure what to do, he flips a coin. And it's only come up a couple of times, but he's pretty willing to, if he doesn't immediately know, like, I think this is a really good idea, he's just like, coin, flip, we're doing that. And it has not always led them to success. But he would rather do that sometimes than trust himself.
Take it out of your hands.
Yeah, it's not my fault.
But then put it back in with the coin. My character Jace in your campaign, there's a lot to him. But one thing that stands out that I tried to reinforce was amongst my initially 3, now 4 personalities, there was always one dominant one who wasn't technically the dominant one or isn't technically the dominant one, but spent so much time in that form that whenever the other forms are out, there's a chance that this other one kind of sneaks in the middle of a conversation. So I'll be talking with someone and then shift really quick to talk as the other Jace, and everyone starts being like, "This guy's crazy." Like there's weird control things going on, and they're not wrong, but there's some control things going on, and it's obvious it wasn't a subtle thing, but it was meant to. The subtle thing about it was there was a reason why it was always the one voice coming out and interrupting the others.
Yeah, and the other players may not pick up on some of those things, but they can also sometimes be things that are revealed later, or they come in and then they go, "Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm following this now. All right, that's clever. Okay." And there's a lot of different types of mannerisms that you can imbue in your characters. Like literally, just go search it. Go look up character mannerisms, and you will find web pages with tons of stuff. But you can have character sayings. Like weird sayings that they repeat every so often whenever it's appropriate, which might express viewpoints that they hold, folklore, cultural influence that went into inspiring them, movement. How do they walk? Do they have some weird thing about how they walk that you fit into descriptions sometimes, which can also just help you with RP in general. If you have these things kind of written down, you have like just a handful of them, like 2 or 3, and you're like every now and then you mention it, you make a reference to it.
Or ideally, if you're at the table, you can like pseudo half of your upper body is like getting to the groove.
Got some swagger.
Yeah, harder to do online at the table, but.
Unless you got cameras, but even then a little bit harder. But habits. Do they have specific habits that
are they a liar?
Fall
Compulsively.
into. My character Raven, it hasn't come up in the RP yet, but he has a list of superstitions that he believes in. And this is a thing with Zweihander. Like, superstitions are a thing. The people are very superstitious. And so I read that in the rule book, and I was like, all right, I'm going to have some superstitions for him. Let's see. What is he going to believe in? All right, he believes on knocking on wood to avert ill fortune. So that's one of the things he would do. It hasn't come up. But I was like, that's a thing. He'll do that as a thing. And sometimes these don't come up. Sometimes you'll come up with some of these and they'll like never come up, or they become hard to do and you just decide to throw them out and just go, forget it.
Yeah. One of my personalities, the same one, who is kind of a dominant personality for Jace, my changeling, is a liar. Lies a lot. And it started out as more of an element of the deity aspect, in that he follows the Traveler, who is an instigator of change and uprooting stagnation and just making people deal with things in the moment without too much planning or just changing an evolutionary element. So I would lie a lot, which didn't work in a role-playing situation, didn't work too much, but I always tried to do it in a manner to throw off the other players. like divine sense. Oh, you sense zombies nearby. Hey guys, I don't sense any zombies nearby. That kind of thing. Just like it's harder to do when you're obviously voicing the lie and out of character. They know that you're lying because you just told me that I did, but the intent is there.
And I'm just sitting there's the DM like, yes, tell them there's no undead. Ah ha ha ha. But yeah, there's let's see, there's a lot of verbal things you can do. One thing that Rowan does sometimes in sentences with question marks to kind of demonstrate uncertainty or a lack of confidence. Always talk over others, which is hard to do without pissing people off in RP sometimes. But a character that talks over others, might show excitability or a lack of care about what other people have to say. Exaggerated throat clearing, tendency to mumble. There's a lot of different things you can do with your voice that work both at the table or online.
And you kind of know it's working in a sense, like when you get asked or the DM gets asked, like, can I insight check that person? Like if there's another player doing something and another player asks, can I insight check that person? Especially online, there was probably something like that was done well to cause the other person to be like, wait a minute, that's not normal. That's not right.
They're being weird.
Yeah, I can sense it.
You can also add character noises and other things to be not just personality traits, but to be as like signature things that they do. Do they whistle all the time? Do they hum? Do they tisk people and stuff a lot? That's just things you can add to add some personality.
Yeah. And
of course, as Brand thought I forgot this. There's physical traits. For your character, which we've already kind of talked about.
I see.
But you can use these a little bit to reveal some of those inner character traits. Like, does your character toss their hair a lot? The little hair toss thing because they're vain. Their nostrils flare when they get upset or something, or when they get really heated. They mouth the lyrics of a song to kind of represent some sort of musical inclination.
Yeah, I don't have one, I think, like movement-wise, like a specific, L'Oreal posture of the hair, but I have picked, like, amongst all my changeling personalities, there is a dominant color to all of them, which is purple. So there's an element of purple in all of them. It's not always the hair. Sometimes it's the skin or just the eyes, but purple exists on all of them somewhere.
Yeah, and one of the key things you can do is voice. And I know we've talked about this a couple times. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean accent. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to do a silly voice. It could just be using a slightly different version of a voice instead of doing your own. And usually when I try to pick of a voice for a character, or pick a manner of speaking, I do try to pick something that reveals things about the character's personality a little bit. Like if I want to play a character that's big and gruff and very tough, I'm going to use a bit more of a gruff sort of voice and it's a bit more bombastic.
Exactly.
If I want to seem a little bit more uncertain, so unsure about what I'm saying, I might incline a number of pauses and other things and such. Perhaps even add question marks, add questioning sentences to things that are statements, but are still questions.
Indeed. It's like, I think with my changeling, I put some focus or effort into that element. Like, one, it has that grumpy voice, and he's very impatient, short-tempered, angered easily. His moniker is the Furious. And then I have an elf who is sly and mischievous, and kind of picked more of I wouldn't know what type of British it is, but it's British. We'll call it that. It's my British is what it is.
Is it?
Yeah, I don't know. And then, I have just regular, almost just me as like one of my human personalities. And then picked up a fourth one along the way that was inspired by one of our other players who had more of a Frenchish thing. So I just kind of went with that and utilized it because it made sense. And they fit kind of moods and personalities.
All right. Well, that's my list.
It's a long list.
I don't know if you
All
had
good
any
stuff.
things, but
I wouldn't say category-wise like list. I think a lot of these things that you do for flavor, a lot of it can be done like early on in the character creation process and should be. And a lot of it also comes from continual thinking as you're playing. Like not giving up on progressing the character and always thinking about what the things that have happened and where you're going and what changes or inflection of changes happen due to the things happening to you.
Yeah, and I would say, like, when I'm creating a character, when I think about these things, it's usually one of the last things I think of. I don't mess with with quirks and traits and customizations of appearance too much until like I've created the backstory and all that rest of that stuff. Because then I like to feed off that stuff. I like to go, okay, so what are the traits and things I want to accentuate with some of these choices. And I think it's a very good idea to keep in mind, like as you play a character, as you continue to develop them through a story, what things change in their behavior or in certain physical representations and such. You know, if they almost die, then something should maybe change because of that. They should maybe be afraid of going underground, or maybe they should not have a fondness for burrowing creatures, or something. Maybe they should have some kind of quirk or something because of that.
And
because it's
probably important.
Traumatic.
Yeah, super. And probably important to allow those first few sessions, first maybe month of sessions, if you're playing a continual campaign, to kind of reinforce some of the things you are trying to do, and also allow those first few sessions to unreinforce those things and to take some of them away if they're not working, and to look at it maybe at a different angle.
Yeah. And that's most it. I think I put a little too much vodka in my drink.
Uh-oh.
I'm feeling a little bit, a little cheerful tonight.
If it's a mimosa or a screwdriver.
But as a reminder for everybody, this Friday I will be streaming KOTOR, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. I'm probably going to finish it Friday, in which case I'm thinking about starting Subnautica Below Zero. I've been waiting 2 years to play the game. Finally, going to stream it. The end of the story is not out yet. It doesn't come out till May, but I think given I only stream like 1.5 times a week, I should probably stretch till May. I will force it to. So I'll be doing that Friday at 6 p.m. Pacific time and Sunday at 4 p.m. Pacific time. And I just put up last episode of Mask and Mimicry on YouTube, so you can catch that on our YouTube channel, which you can find in the information below. This one will also go up soon, so feel free to go check it out there. If you're rushing the recording, whatever, leave a comment. Tell us what sort of cool things you've done with your character, what sort of customizations you've done, where you get inspiration for some of these things. And remember, if it's a silly D12, it's probably not a mimic. Bye, everybody.